you a woman in medicine feeling overwhelmed and disconnected from the personal fulfillment that you desire? You're in the right place. Join doctors Joanne and Erin as they rewrite the rules for women in medicine. Let's begin.
Albert Einstein once said, "Everybody's a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it is stupid." And there's a physician in the UK who spent years training to become a pediatrician, only to leave medicine and become a primary school teacher. Was that a failure, or was it a fish finally finding water? In this episode, we're asking a question that doesn't get asked enough. What if the environment is the problem and not you? And I'm here with my super co host, Dr. Erin Hurley, and this is exactly what we're going to be covering in this episode. And before we get to the content of this episode, if you haven't yet, we would love it if you could give us an honest rating and review. So if you're listening in Apple Podcasts, you can hit where it says go to show, scroll down, and there you're going to see the stars and an ability to leave us a comment. That's how we know if you're liking the show, if there's something that you would want us to talk more about. And that's how we also get in front of more people. So please help us with that. We will truly appreciate it. And with that, I'm going to go straight into what we have for today. I cannot wait to hear more from Erin. So I love, right, like a lot of us have heard that quote from Einstein. So Erin, explain that fish climbing a tree concept. And then also, if we could add, how do neurodiversities, hypersensitivities, or even trauma history make it even more exhausting when we're working in an environment that's the opposite of what we need?
I think in medicine, we are so keen on blaming ourselves. I should be able to figure this out. Women physicians, we tend to be intelligent. We've gone through a lot through medical school residency. We've learned how to get through so many hard things. And so I believe the first thing we usually do is that we look to ourselves. What am I doing wrong? How can I fix this? As opposed to, is there something in the circumstances or in the environment that's adding to that? And I can use myself as an example. When I was working from home a few years ago, all of my kids were living here. I was making it a point to be more of a doting mother because I hadn't been like that when my kids were younger. So when my daughter would come home from school, I would make her lunch. I would make sure she got to school because she wasn't driving, even as a senior. So I was doing all of these tasks and trying to help keep up on the household chores, etc. And that meant that my work was very interrupted. And what I know now, being an efficiency expert and helping people shrink how much time they're taking to get their work done, every time I allowed myself to be interrupted, I was creating about 25 more minutes of work to get back to focus. And if you think about your work environment, do you have an office with a closed door? Some of the physicians I've coached, they are in like a bullpen, right? And there's just an open space and there's all of the healthcare providers all in the same room. So anytime you or anybody gets interrupted, you all get interrupted. And I just think how inefficient that is. No wonder people are taking work home. No wonder they're doing pajama time, doing their charts into the late night. No wonder they're giving up time on the weekends or even on vacations to get their administrative work done, because the way they're being asked to do the work is not conducive to helping them do it in a timely manner. And that's not a you thing. Anyone who gets interrupted when they're doing work that takes some cognitive thinking, like finishing charts or going through your inbox, there's cognitive load to that. Anyone who gets interrupted, it takes about 23 to 25 minutes to get back on track. Think about how many times a day you're interrupted. And then that's just general. And then you also brought up, Joanne, about neurodiversities. So for some of us, myself included, I'm very noise distracted. And yet I'm also so sensitive, I can't use noise canceling headphones because they hurt my ears. And I remember being in one office and it was not they weren't in my office. There was a hallway and then another office, and they sat on the opposite end of this other office, and I could hear them crunching their carrots at lunchtime. And you and I shared in one of our in our episodes about ourselves how that, noisy eating is it's like nails on a chalkboard for those of us old enough to remember chalkboards. And so for me, having a noisy environment, I remember for one of my kids, I said, "Do you want to wear headphones when you're taking tests at school?" And that would be too embarrassing for them. And yet the noise distractions was real. And if we don't take enough time to get to know ourselves and recognize what's holding us back, what is in our environment or our circumstances that is amplifying things that may not be our strengths or stealing away those things that are our strengths, are there ways that we can recognize that and possibly do something about it?
It makes me think of, with my psychiatry hat on, of the patients that I have who have ADHD, especially the younger ones who are students. And then they ask me to write something so that it asks for specific things. And it's exactly what you're saying, like extended time to take tests, different environment, especially when taking tests, that they should be allowed to get up and move after certain time frames, like 15, 20 minutes, right? Like the things that, especially like you're saying, those of us who are older, like it's like I remember, right? Like school was so strict, like you had to sit in the chair and you cannot move and you cannot even go to the bathroom unless, right? Like you absolutely had to. And that at least now this is more well known, and we help. And then also thinking of some of my patients who have really bad anxiety, and I can write letters for them to ask for accommodations for the kind of work that they do, and that right, like the expectation of workload and time frames and things like that to accommodate. And yet, would we, even as women in medicine, think of any of that? And it might not be to that extreme of having a diagnosis or having a psychiatrist to write you a letter, but recognizing where are your strengths that you can leverage, and then what are the things that you're not that great at, right? Like, Erin was sharing how she's noise sensitive, right? Like then you accommodate, like you first recognize it and then you try to accommodate it. But then I think a first step for a lot of us is recognizing those things and giving ourselves permission to try to do something about it without judging it like it's a problem, but rather than thinking, this is how my brain works, these are, right, like I know what time of the day is better for me and what things I'm very sensitive to as well. And not that we always have the ability to ask for those things, right? Like you might be thinking that too, like, yeah, it would be nice to go in a medical clinic or hospital to say, I can only take this much workload, or I need to be in a quiet environment. But it's still worth thinking of what we could ask for, because we might be surprised of the things that we might get accommodations for, and even then the expectations that we have for ourselves.
And if you never ask for an accommodation or ways to strengthen your strengths and minimize your weaknesses, the answer will always be no. So part of that too is if you can become more aware, and one of the things I love that's going on now, I spend most of my social media time is on LinkedIn. There's a lot of medical professionals and physicians that are talking about their own neurodiversities, whether it's being on the autism spectrum, whether it's being on the ADHD spectrum, or a combination of the two. And there's actually a medical student that I follow, and she talks all the time about her quirks and is just like, deal with it. She is not only aware of what makes her her, she's not apologizing for it. And she's asking others to learn about it and recognize that's just who she is, and not feel guilty or apologetic. And my hope is that one of the ways I see the awareness about neurodiversities come up is as a pediatrician. Many of the times the kids were coming in getting diagnosed with neurodiversities. And then that led to awareness for the parents, because maybe when they were young, if it was the mom that's got ADHD tendencies, it wasn't recognized as much in women as it is with the boys, because they present differently, both as kids and adults. Or even awareness by the dad, because a lot of times they didn't talk about it, or those type of topics were pushed under the rug, or they were just described as, hyperactive, but not actually diagnosed as ADHD. And now these adults are having children, and there's more awareness in the schools or the pediatrician's office or family doctor's offices are making awareness of the child's diagnosis. And then the parents are going, oh, I see myself, and then seeking their own diagnosis. And some of those people are physicians. And now it's like, for some, now maybe having more awareness. Why did it take you longer to study for the boards? Why did you struggle with organization? And having that awareness can sometimes lead to more compassion for yourself and more grace with recognizing instead of having that self-criticism come out. And I know that we've talked about ADHD and neurodiversity in a few of our prior episodes. I know with Dr. Pamela Buchanan, and I'm looking at our list here. I'm struggling to come up with the other one where we talked about ADHD. Brittany Bell, episode 157. So when we're willing to share those neurodiversities or those struggles, then other people might say, oh, that's me too. I'm not the only one. And so that's where my hope is that we can sometimes turn the focus on ourselves instead of trying to understand everyone else around us, is understand what is it about me that makes me unique, and how can I better understand that to create an environment or request an environment that will be more supportive.
Yes, so true. And that leads to my next question, because as women in medicine, we're often told to toughen up, just adapt, push through. And why is it so important now to reframe that narrative? And what's the cost when we don't?
I love that question. What's the cost when we don't? Because the costs are high right now. When we look at burnout rates, Joanne and I talk about this ad nauseum, right? Around 50% plus or minus, especially women physician burnout rates are higher than for the men. And it's high for everyone right now. And when burnout rates are so high and turnover rates are so high, and then you've got all of the things going on with, eruptions around the world and politics, there's so much that's out there causing us stress. And what if we could change a few things in our environment that is under our control, because so many things aren't, and that can relieve some of your stress. For some, I remember when we had a big open workspace for the physicians and the medical assistants and the nurses at one of my former jobs. It was this big bullpen and it was noisy. And they actually had this light, like a light bulb called a yak tracker. And it was red if it was super noisy, and yellow if it was moderately, and green if it was quiet. And many of the physicians brought in noise canceling headphones, and other healthcare providers who weren't used to working in that environment are like, how do you guys get anything done? And so again, people chose to invest in, what can I do? I can wear noise canceling headphones. We had little signs up because we didn't have a door to close that were a visual to say, hey, pause, I'm in the middle of something. Please don't interrupt me. And teaching those around you to help support what is going to help you. And again, this is some of the stuff I've talked about in some of my courses and in my coaching about how to break up with pajama charting, right? Part of it is you can learn new skills, and then you can teach others to stop interrupting you so much. You can batch your workflow. So there are things you can do to create an environment that's as helpful as you can. And again, the just toughening up, just pushing through. Maybe there was capacity to do that in medicine a decade or two ago, 3 decades ago. Right now, there is just no wiggle room. There's no white space. There's very little capacity for healthcare providers to not be on their A game as much of the time as is possible, or it's going to steal from you any extra time you have. And unfortunately, for many people that I've worked with who are struggling with, especially their charting or getting their work done, for some of them, they are working into the night. I remember one client never got a full night's sleep because they were going to bed between 11 and 1 a.m. and then getting up early in the morning because their charting took so long. And then they're giving up their entire weekends, and many of them giving up their vacations. that's not a one person story. Many people struggled with that. And when you can learn skills and change your environment to compress how long it takes you to do your work, my goal is not for them to then take on that many more patients, but to create time for themselves, for their families, and for their relationships. And it's as we're fond of saying, it may not be easy, but what's the cost of not trying something new and having things stay the same? And for some people who have gained back 15 or 20 hours a week because they learned to change their environment and to compress the amount of time it took to do their work, their lives are significantly different, even though they're in the same marriages, the same relationships with their family, and in the same work. And they're able to get much different results not simply, but by taking charge of what they can control and choosing things differently.
So important. We do definitely have to take accountability of what we can control, acknowledging that sometimes the environment will not support us, but that there's still many things that we can do. So thank you for that reminder. Now, for that physician who suspects they might be using Einstein's saying, climbing the wrong tree, what are some of the tools and pathways that can help them gain insight about what kind of herb they actually need to flourish?
We're going to go back. I'm going to go back to get some outside perspective. And for Joanne and I, as physician coaches, we see trends, we see patterns because we don't have ourselves to judge things by. And unfortunately, in medicine, we've been taught to be so independent and to be problem solvers and not to ask for help or support. And that can seem like a weakness. And yet I see it as using math in your favor, right? You get one good friend, you get a group of a tribe of people behind you that are supporting you and bouncing ideas off of, or helping you if you're see your blind spots, or if you're struggling with mental health issues, having a therapist that you've got a relationship with, and their job is to help support you. You know, Joanne and I both do coaching, and we've seen both from receiving coaching, the impact it can have on our lives, as well as being coaches for individuals in your same circumstances or very similar. And what happens is, again, when you choose to use your agency in those areas of your life that you can control, you can get different outcomes. And yet, if you're relying on yourself to see your blind spots, if you're going to DIY it, that, in my opinion, is oftentimes the most painful, least cost effective, and least time effective way of getting there. And the example I've used in my own life is I paid for a one-on-one coach 20 years into my career, and I broke habits that I'd had for over 2 decades in 6 weeks because I had an outside perspective from an expert that I was paying money to feed into me. It could be a one-way relationship, and there was a two-way relationship, but her job was to help see my blind spots, to help me make changes that I wanted to see, to draw out of me what did I need. And 6 weeks making change that I couldn't make in 20 years by my own DIYing it was worth every penny and more that I paid, because that then started this belief in myself that I really can have change in my life. I really do have agency. And that's what motivates me when I'm coaching my clients. And, I'm sure with Joanne as well, because we see that change is possible. And yet trying to figure all those things out on your own, especially if you're overwhelmed and burdened with so many decisions and you've got so much decision fatigue. So who can you tap into that is going to shrink the amount of work that it takes for you to get to know yourself better and to find out what are those changes that you can make, and looking for the biggest, what we call needle movers, where if I do this small thing, like I was just sharing an AI app with Joanne here, this one tiny tool, and I coached another client on it this morning, but if you implement this tiny little tool, you might be able to save up to 10, 20 hours a week. And just by implementing this, and if you spend 30 minutes getting started with it and it saves you hours of time every week, is that worth the investment? But for you to find that tool on your own, you know, how much time would it take? And that's where, again, having experts that you've gotten to know and trust to shrink that for you instead of adding that much more to your plate.
This is so good, and the power of community, like we always talk about, and this changes that a good connection can create in terms of helping us with awareness, with tools, changing perspectives, and the accountability to take action in some of these things that we already know, but sometimes we need someone to remind us or help us pick from the different options. So important. Erin, any final words of wisdom with this? Because I know this is such a big topic that we can go on and on, but something that you want to leave our audience with.
Let's not give up hope. And there's so many things that you could be watching and listening to right now happening around the world, in our own country, and in your neighborhood. And it can be very distracting and heartbreaking. And yet, can we foster hope? My goal is Joanne and I are creating hope for you, sharing stories from our own lives and those of our clients that they have made positive change, even when things are hard, even when times are turbulent. And we don't want you to give up hope. We want you to seek out the community that you need. And you may need something completely different than I do. And so, what I'd like you to do is, what's the recipe that you need? And if what you've tried so far hasn't worked, then add a little something new, try a little more of something you've tried already, try subtracting something. But don't give up hope to find that recipe of your life that will serve you better. If you're not having joy, if you're having too much dread, I want to give you that seed of hope, plant that seed. And what do you need to do to water that? And find those people who will help you make that hope flourish instead of snuffing it out.
I love that. Thank you for that. I think I needed to listen to that message. Thank you. And I hope that you all had as much of an inspiring feeling right now. And if you haven't yet, we would love it if you could share this episode. If you found it helpful and you know that there's someone else who needs to listen to this message, please share the episode. And with that, stay tuned because our next episode is coming right up.
Do you want exclusive resources and the opportunity to connect with us? Then visit createmeaninginmedicine.com now, where you'll dive deeper into how you can create meaning in medicine. And if you're serious about optimizing your results, take 2 quick steps now. Connect with us on the website and tune in to the next episode.